Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. It's great to be here. It's great to be able to speak to such a great crowd of TETRA supporters and TETRA users and potential TETRA users. So my presentation here is really talking about the people who have already made big investments in TETRA, people who have yet to make that decision on whether to do TETRA, and those who have made decisions and are looking to refresh their TETRA networks, about safeguarding their investments that they're making. But also, this is about coming to an event like this, it's about listening. So I want to share with you 3 key trends that we're seeing from our community base and how that's impacting us from the vendor community. The first thing that I think is important to really consider is the success of TETRA. TETRA has been a phenomenal success around the world. Those early pioneers of TETRA have really been rewarded and vindicated in their choice of TETRA. And as you can see here, in the last 5 years, we've had 57 additional countries adopt TETRA. Now, why is that really important? It means that companies like myself invest heavily in R&D. It means that companies like Jean-Marc invest heavily in R&D. It means that we have a community, an ecosystem. It means that we provide great products. It means that we have a competitive base. It means we have to spend more R&D to have greater innovation. And that benefits all of the end users and the customers using TETRA. So it's a fundamental platform that drives the engine of dynamism, vibrant, and dynamic standard. Now, if we think about TETRA, it's very often thought TETRA originated in Europe, it's done there, and it's rolling out in the rest of the world. That's not quite the case. As you can see here, Norway and Germany, and Tor Helge talked this morning about the Norway network and the experiences that they've had. They're rolling out nationwide networks still, or are just starting and embarking on nationwide networks. So still in Northern Europe, major rollouts of TETRA are still going on. And that drives the user base, which again drives the innovation and the R&D that underpins the future of the TETRA community. Going beyond public safety, this is numbers from IMS, our colleagues in IMS who provided what they think are predicted growth rates. So this is about the future. And you see 3 strands here. One is the classical government and public safety. The other is transportation and metro, which has been very, very heavily led out of Asia Pacific in terms of deploying TETRA as a transportation solution. And then oil, gas, and utilities, another area of high growth that we see for the TETRA business areas in the future. Nearly 80% of all PMR users today use analog radios. They are now moving over to digital. A number of them will move over to TETRA because it provides the resilience, the capabilities, and the features that we have put into it as a community over the years. So that will drive different form factors, that will drive different solutions, again, which either community can borrow from. Now, what about the long-term future for TETRA? Question that gets asked. If you're making a huge investment, particularly with taxpayers' money, what is the future for that huge investment? I'll give you one number, a number that keeps coming up again and again from very mature TETRA users. The year 2026. Consistently, the majority of customers that we're seeing, a significant majority, are coming to us and telling us, what's the plan to get me to 2026 with TETRA? There are a few outliers. There are people coming to us and saying, how about 2037? We'll have conversations with them separately. But you can see here that we're starting to get people who make significant investments, understand the TETRA offering, are using it, and are having those conversations to talk to vendors like ourselves to say, what is the commitment going forward for that? So this is the year that we seem to be operating to at the moment. I think over time that will even further extend out. Okay, I talked about really these sessions are a reflection to me about what we hear from our community base globally in TETRA and what the implications can mean in terms of what we need to go and do. We've got 3 major trends that we've heard. First trend is single policing officers or lone workers. The trend being driven by the ability to try and spread resources to maximum capability. The second trend is do more with less. A very familiar story, certainly in certain parts of the world where budgets have been exceedingly reduced or held and contained. So with what they've got already, how can I get more out of what I've already invested in? And the third one is, what is the future? What is the future of public safety? What does that mean to me? And what direction are we going in? So for all of these, we'll cover some key areas and talk about what they mean from the vendor community and what that potentially means for the end users of TETRA. So let's talk with the first one, safety. Lone workers, police officers are increasing in number. This puts police officers at considerable risk. Officers on their own are utterly reliant on their communications device. They are utterly reliant on TETRA. And it behoves us in the TETRA vendor community to make sure that we have devices that can be called upon and can be relied upon. The single most terrifying thing a police officer can hear is silence. When they really, really need backup, urgent assistance, not having that is a terrifying prospect. So what does that mean? It means we have to go back and take a look at TETRA and look at the original standards in TETRA and the capabilities. Many years ago, the connectivity in TETRA was defined by the receiver sensitivity, how well a radio can listen in to a radio signal. That TETRA standard was developed many years ago, and the technologies advanced tremendously. It is now able to exceed that receiver sensitivity by 2 dB. That means 14% increase in range, just by having a 2 dB improvement inside the radio itself. That means the dark alleys, that means the in-building environments that were hard to cover may have that coverage now, and when you press that button, you may be confident that you can actually get a response out. Part of that ensuring connectivity is in-building coverage. As you'll see from many vendors, including ourselves, a lot of the form factors on base stations are being changed in order for you to place that in-building specific coverage as you fill in the gaps in those areas. On top of that, it is hard for you to really do drive testing around a building. Essentially, you have to be reliant on the coverage maps that you've predicted. That's not good enough. Officers who've got poor coverage may not send that information back, and you may be unaware that you have coverage issues or interference issues in particular parts of a network, and people may do different routes and walk routes throughout their geographic coverage. So that's why we've looked at how do we get real-time information back to the radio planners on the performance of their network, so that they can look down to an individual radio and see the performance of that radio and see if the signal's performing well. That changes the conversation from angry police officers who are saying, I haven't got coverage in this area and it's extremely frustrating for us, to radio planners and radio managers going, I see that you don't have coverage in this area, we're going to do something about that. So it's being proactive between the teams that work together that provide the communications and the end users. So ensuring connectivity is a vital part of that public safety that we need to have. The next area is really about do more with less. Do more with less is really about squeezing the maximum out of the investment that you've made out of it. And we'll see here, that's really about driving the utility of the existing TETRA network and making sure it's flexible for the future. Before I start that, one of the simplest things you can do, and what we used to do in analog radio, is pooling radios. So what that means is you have today individual issue of radios, and then potentially now with TETRA and some of the features we brought in, you can actually pool the radios, which means you can use a smaller stock of radios and then you pool them out. Now, the one word of warning with this, pooling's okay to do, and you may consider to do it now, you may consider to do it in 2, 5, 3, 4, 10 years in the future, is to consider what happens when someone is given an individual issue radio converted to a pooled radio. I get my individual issue radio. I look after it. If I break it, I'm going to have to explain it. Or I get my pooled radio. And I have my pooled radio, and I think, well, I'm maybe not so much concerned about that radio anymore, and I might just treat it with a little less respect. People who have pooled radios have seen this, and they've seen any quality issues in those radios in terms of robustness come into play. You also get behavioral differences when people use pooled radios. They start using the radio in a different way. They start testing everything, the connectors on the radio. They walk around like this. Again, respect for the equipment kind of diminishes when it's a pooled radio. That's fine, as long as you make sure that we, the vendor community, make sure the floor cracks and not the radio when it's thrown around. Simple things make big differences in how we use our radios. The other key point is developing, with the same hardware, increased capability. Hundreds of value-added features have been placed into TETRA over the years that it's been developed by all of the vendors. Every month, we're adding more and more features. And we're adding them because we're being asked. This community here, the people in this room, really define what the features are going to be in TETRA and what they're going to be in the future. A great example of that is call-out. One customer asked for call-out, and a call-out essentially is, I want to send a message to a radio. And that message goes to the radio, and I want the person to acknowledge they've received that message. So fire is a great example, police is a great example, but think about an airport. You might have 100, you may have 1,000 users in an airport. A weather front comes in, you might want to tell everybody there's a snow front coming in, unlikely to happen around here, I have to admit, but the weather does change, and you want to acknowledge that they received that message. Call out forces the user to acknowledge they received that message. As I said before, that was driven by a customer coming to us. We went and did that solution, an end-to-end solution, and then we drove it back into the standard so that everyone else could adopt it. So it could be a standard that could be used across the entire community. That is the unique thing about the TETRA community. The influence is very high for individual end users, and the ability to get it back into standards and be used widely across the community is also very high. Another part of that receiver sensitivity I mentioned to you before is efficient coverage. By having 2 dB additional receiver sensitivity built in to the radios, you get 30% additional coverage. That means potentially less cell sites, which drives down your capital costs and ultimately your operational costs. And if we take a look at operational costs, they can be sometimes the single biggest cost for a very large network or even a medium-sized network. One of the things that drives costs is backhaul. Backhaul costs dramatically reduce if you introduce Ethernets and don't use E1 links. In fact, in many emerging countries, they don't even put down E1 links anymore. They're just Ethernet backhaul links. The cost profile on that is quite tremendous when that changes over. Other things as well, as networks grow, more capacity is added to the network. Not necessarily you might want to add that onto the zones. So what we've made sure is the zone capacity as a vendor, we've increased it dramatically over time to ensure that you can either reduce the number of zones you need or have a larger number of users. These zones also can take a lot of power. They consume power, and they require time to replan. We've driven down the power consumption again dramatically, which drives down the electricity costs and the power consumption costs. Ongoing, everyday costs of a network. Sounds a little bit boring, but it's actually the underlying cost structure that drives a lot of the networks and how they're being managed. Now, future-proofing. Future-proofing, as Jean-Marc said, I think is probably the key question. What is the future? Where are we going? Conceptually, these are the 2 questions I get asked. What is the right path? And please, please keep my options open. We don't know, as a community base, how we're going to be using our networks in the future. You don't want to be in the position where you are here and end up on the red dots in 2 or 3 years' time after making a significant investment. So you really need to know from us how we get from A to B and make sure that there's B, C, D, E, F, G options out there in place. Underpinning all of that and what the change is, the rise of data. It's really the rise of applications if you think about it. Here you see the feedback that we've had from customers globally about the top 6 applications that they see that are important to them. It varies tremendously from region to region and from customer to customer. But you can see here, database lookup is number 1, consistently, because calling dispatch and waiting for dispatch takes a lot of time, and the queuing that a lot of officers find is frustrating. Imaging, being able to send an image of a missing child or a missing person instantaneously to a large number of officers is also vital. Video, I think, goes without explanation. With video, you can do tremendous things that you could never do. You have real-time situational awareness with video. Report writing, keeping officers out on the field, not in the station, so that they can keep themselves more operational. Mapping, knowing the resources, where your other officers are, where the locations if you're going to somewhere unfamiliar, and then standard email and internet. what you see underneath each of those is the performance for TEDs. So TEDs, one carrier of TEDs, with what we would class a busy hour type of traffic. You can see in the green where things can be done quite comfortably with TEDs. You can see in the amber and in the red where it starts to get uncomfortable with TEDs. So you need to look at TEDs for delivering potentially 80 to 90% of your applications, but when it comes to things like video or image-rich, changing, interactive environments, we have to look at the broadband solutions. That's what's driving a lot of discussions about the future. Now, you need to make a decision that may change in time. What is mission critical for you as opposed to you? It may vary in between different services, different organizations, different geographical areas. There is two classes, and these are the words that I get from customers, not the ones that we make up. Service impacting and mission impacting. Service impacting is really applications that can be, they're nice, they keep you efficient. Mission impacting is, I do not want to lose these in a critical emergency. So service impacting essentially is saying, if I lose it, it's an inconvenience. Mission impacting, if I lose it, it's a serious problem. Which one of those applications fits in which bucket is for you to decide. Obviously, service impacting, you can think about putting on a commercial network. But we all know that will not always be available. I stood on this stage this time last year, and that same week in the UK, 3 million people were cut off from a cellular operator in central London for 16 hours. Nothing had happened apart from somebody broke into the operator's network and stole a piece of equipment. That took the network out of operation. Obviously, when there's a real emergency, the congestion, the usage can make those commercial networks not operational. Inside mission impacting, you have mission critical data and you have mission critical broadband. Of course, here we're talking about TETRA, multi-slot packet data, and TEDs, and of course LTE. If we take a look about the devices side, the feedback we're getting back from customers, we've shown them unified, 2 devices. Unified, 2 devices. We've shown them working unified and 2 devices. The feedback that we've got back very consistently is, this is my safety device, the radio. I don't take it off. I don't look at it. I use it. That is a data device, 2-handed usage. I look at it. They're 2 different devices. I'm not taking my TETRA radio off. That's the feedback we're getting. A collaborative device allows you to mix and match either private broadband or public broadband, and using a Bluetooth connection, you can have backup data services, you can have interplay between the devices, and of course, you can have different form factors as a secondary device. So it gives you a lot more flexibility in how you go and deploy your field. In addition, we believe that secondary device will change more rapidly than a TETRA device. It will cycle out in probably 2 to 3 years' time compared to a TETRA radio, which cycles out 5 to 6 to 7 years' time. So that's how you get from A to B, future-proofing your investment. TETRA networks today have virtualized IP cores. What does that mean? It means you can run almost anything underneath them without being linked to the hardware. So you have your servers running underneath there, software runs it up, it's virtualized away. The logical entities are not specifically locked to hardware, which means you get TETRA TEDs enabled, and virtually all networks should be TEDs enabled from day one today, and you have got almost LTE-ready capability because you've got that virtualized IP core. Spectrum, big issue. We believe that spectrum is a minimum of 5 plus 5 megahertz. Ideally, you want 10 plus 10 megahertz. Why? Think about a simple incident where you have 7 or 8 streams of mission-critical data you want to send, video data, in a small confined environment. You will use up that spectrum. And LTE has to be a big, big difference from TEDs to make it worthwhile doing. Securing that spectrum is going to be hard because it needs to be harmonized, and if you want public-private spectrum, it's going to again be the people in this room who work together to get that unified. Applications. In applications, we're adding real-time capabilities to have preemption, to have quality beyond LTE, so that you can stack up the quality requirements depending on your command and control, so you can prioritize different data over other ones. We're doing this today live in networks in the US. We've won a number of the key networks in LTE in the US networks there, and we're also deploying devices. The collaborative device that I talked before, the LEX 700, we've actually announced that device there that does block D and the normal block of LTE spectrum as well. That's all happening today. As time goes on, you're going to want software upgrades. You're going to want features, again, for TETRA. That's because you're going to ask them for your operations, the different ways you work. You should expect that. You're going to need to prepare, if you go down the route for LTE, what you need to consider for your sites. Prepare the spectrum you're going to need, then prepare the sites themselves. Backhaul, transmission, site space, all that combined is a requirement that we need to have in place. And the final state is a unified TETRA LTE network, one network management. When you change the talk group, you change the data group automatically. You don't actually have to think about doing that, so that you can control your network very much from a voice-centric perspective, and all your multimedia flows change exactly in that way. Then you can have a whole range of devices that may be unified, and certainly will be collaborative, that will be in play that you have. So that gives you a route from A to B and in place. So in summary, TETRA is global and growing. It's safer. The audio has been improved tremendously in TETRA just this year. So please take a look at devices and you see that. And the connectivity is improved through receiver sensitivity. Efficiency, driving down your costs, improving your operational efficiency, coverage and capacity, and more TETRA features are coming through the pipeline. And in the future, you have a path. You have TETRA and you have TEDS today, and a path to LTE. I think TETRA is a very vibrant and dynamic standard because we have a vibrant and dynamic community. And it's by all of us coming together in events like this that we can really understand the future of public safety and enterprise and oil and gas. Thank you very much.